Well, hello again. Welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name is Graham, this is X-Plane 12 and the Hot Start Challenger 650. Firstly, my sincere apologies for the long wait you've had for this video. It's taken a lot longer to get through the Challenger series than I initially anticipated. Partly my fault for being really busy at work. There's also some disruption in the X-Plane universe towards the end of 2022 with the release of X-Plane 12 and the associated fixes and changes that were necessary after that sim was released. And also the Challenger has been in an extended beta period for version 1.8. I'm flying 1.8 at the moment. It's still an open beta, and I would encourage any Challenger pilot flying 1.7 to consider applying for the open beta for 1.8. There's a lot of useful changes in this version of the aircraft. So we're going to continue the flight, continue the descent down towards Glasgow with an approach and landing on the ILS approach. Naturally, with such a long time between videos, there may be some continuity errors in this video. I really hope that's not too distracting for you. Let's jump inside. Okay, so here we are, cruising along at flight level 390, just over Ireland at the moment. You can see Ireland on the MFD over here. It's showing about 17 minutes until top of descent. Normally we'd get a lot of this approach briefing stuff done much earlier on in the flight, but I don't want to make the video too long, so we'll do this in fairly quick order and get the aircraft ready for descent. One of the interesting things that's been added is a little pop-up. If you hover the mouse over the displays, you get the control panels appearing, and that makes it a lot more useful, a lot easier to do simple changes on the systems, but I still like having the 2D pop-ups. I find them a lot easier to work with for systems management tasks. One of the first changes is the weather conditions at Glasgow have changed since we left Montreal. It's now going to be a landing on runway 05 rather than runway 23. So I'll change that over. We'll use departure arrival, and I'll change it to the ILS approach runway 05 with vectors. Let's bring up the arrival data and I'll execute that. So that puts it into the flight plan, and with the arrival data we can use the opportunity of having this screen up here to verify the information on the charts. So on the right hand side, click charts. I've got a Navigraph subscription on here, so it's still showing me the Montreal chart. Lower menu, and then use the outer, the menu advance, and we'll go down, have a look at the BLACA arrival, select that, and then I can use the internal wheel to cycle through the charts. There's also the ability on the 2D panel to use the mouse wheel to zoom and the right mouse button to pan around. It actually uses the little joystick control here, but for usability in the sim we can right mouse and pan around. So it's the ILS approach for runway 05. I've got a frequency of 110.1 and up here 110.1. My approach course is 048. 048 checks out. Glide path angle 3 degrees. Yeah, we've got 3 degrees on there, and threshold elevation of 26 feet, which cross-checks with the plan on there. So all is good in that respect. Whilst we've got the chart up, we'll look at the minima as well. I'm going to push the reference button on here. Let me just pop up the PFD momentarily. I'm going to push refs on here. We're going to use the data, the menu advance, the outside knob to scroll down, and baro, I'll just spin the knob until we get to 230 baro. So that's all you need to do to set the minima. You can choose radio or baro minimums. Because it's a Cat 1 ILS we're going to fly, I'll use baro minimums. Having done that, we need to have a look at the fuel state and work out how heavy we're going to be when we land. So let me get rid of the charts. You can see on the left side, MFD, I've got the VNAV information here, and on the right hand side I've got the weights. We can cycle through that, we can change that information by using the display menu button on here. This is showing the left hand side just now, and it doesn't matter which CDU you use because we can control left and right and MFD and PFD. But if I want to see the VNAV information, we cycle it on there. So on gives you the weights, and VNAV gives you the VNAV information. So VNAV is useful on the left hand side and weights are useful on the right hand side. So go to perf now, perf again, and select approach. We're looking at Glasgow. I know it's 15 degrees there, wind is 050 at 5 knots. And then we'll click on to the next page. Before we do that though, runway conditions. You'll notice that if compared to the early releases, as you cycle through the runway conditions, you'll get performance out of range or supplemental data. That's going to be explained in an FAQ in the product documentation, but for the time being, just keep in mind that as you change the runway conditions here, it might change the data set you have available on the next page. So sometimes you'll be able to see ALD, actual landing distance, and sometimes you need to see LFL. When it's dry, you can see both. When it's wet, supplemental data, you can see LFL, but you can't see ALD. And conversely, it's different if it's contaminated. Too complicated to explain in the video. The long story short is, if you're not seeing information in there, try A or try L. L is most useful for dry runways. We also want to make sure the weight even is correct. So have a look at the predicted landing weight showing up here, 14.9, and let's just type that in here, 14.9. Send it on there. It computes a set of speeds, and we can send those to the PFD. So VREF is 123, that's going to make my approach speed 128. As we look through the flight plan, I'll bring the charts page back up again, and we'll look at the arrival, the BLACA arrival on here. You notice I've got constraint at Girvan of 150 and Lanark flight level 70. And these are affected on the flight plan. Flight level 70 and flight level 150. You notice we've got a top of descent in 9 minutes. What I want to do is show you the advisory descent function as well. So what I'm going to do is clear out the flight level 150 constraint and also clear out the flight level 70. Now when I execute this, keep an eye on the VNAV window. I'll make it just a little bit bigger just now in case you're watching on a smaller device. As I execute that, you notice it goes from having a top of descent to a descent advisory. The reason it's doing that is because it doesn't have any altitude constraint to anchor the descent profile. When it says advisory descent here, it will not fly a VNAV descent for you. This is basically saying it's time to descend, but I have literally no idea how you want to do that. So if it's got an advisory descent in there, it's because your descent profile is not constrained on here. Let's put Gerva back in, so flight level 150 for Gerva. And when I execute that, you'll notice it goes back from advisory descent to a planned top of descent. See, it says TOD rather than DES. And when it's TOD, it means it will be able to fly a VNAV descent for you. If I get rid of the charts, well, before we get rid of the charts, you'll notice the arrival takes us from Gerva all the way to Lanark, but I'm going to land on runway 05 at Glasgow. So whilst I could continue all the way to Lanark and then downwind and then back again in a big S-turn, it's unlikely Glasgow air traffic would need us to do that. So with that in mind, I'm going to change the flight plan ever so slightly. Looking at the ILS approach, I've got the runway 05, then 7 miles before that, I've got the fix, the final fix, and then 3 miles before that, I've got the final approach course fix, the CF here, 05. That's about 10 miles out from the runway. What I want to do is to put another waypoint on there to help me go from Turnberry here across to the ILS approach, just so that I've got a sensible routing on the FMS, because it's not a VATSIM flight, we've not got online radar control. So what I'm going to do is create a pilot defined waypoint based on the CF05. So I'm going to type CF05 and then I'm going to choose the radial. So the reciprocal of the runway would be 230. I'm going to come 30 degrees to the south, so that would be CF, and then 200 degrees. And then I'll make it another 10 miles out, and I'll put that in here. Now, if I get rid of the chart momentarily, and I zoom in a little bit, remember you can mouse wheel on the MFD when it's in 2D. You see I've now got that CF01 point there. That's perfect. What I want to do is link it between Turnberry. So Turnberry goes to CF01, then goes to CF05. Let's sort that out. I'll just get rid of Lanark, and I'll get rid of the discontinuity. And what we've got now is essentially a straight line, more or less, from Turnberry down towards the runway. One of the interesting things about the Challenger is it doesn't fly an idle descent, it flies a flight path angle on the descent. Top descent's in 2 minutes. So, as we approach top descent, I'm going to put it into VNAV. So, push the VNAV button here. You notice I've got VALTs. I'm going to spin my altitude selector down. Let's set it to go down to flight level 160. There's 160. And as well as that, we're going to go into the performance, and resume VNAV. So at the moment it's cyan, it's selected Mach 80. I can resume VNAV and it's now magenta. That means the aircraft's going to start the descent and manage the speed by itself. You see path is uninitiated and we'll get top of descent. So the Challenger is going to try and fly a 3-degree path, but it's going to struggle to decelerate on a 3-degree path. So what I want to do is change the descent angle between my custom waypoint, this 01 point, and the ILS itself. And instead of a 3-degree or 3.38 it's calculated, I'm just going to put a 2-degree angle in there. 2.0. And I'll just drop that on the 05, and it's going to compute a new descent angle. Flying that shallower descent angle will help the aircraft decelerate, help us make space for the aircraft to decelerate. The last thing you want to do before you start the descent is look at perf VNAV and make sure that you've got a suitable transition flight level in here. That's the top descent alert. So you can change the VNAV settings on here. If you want to fly a slower descent, you can set them on the VNAV setup here. And if you always want to do it, if you want to customize your airframe, there's a index, next page, and then you can change all the defaults for the aircraft. And that will persist on the aircraft. So now we're descending down to flight level 160. Everything's working quite well. The ATS is still in speed mode. One thing to keep an eye on is if the ATS goes into retard mode, you want to make sure that it does bring the power levers all the way back. It doesn't always bring the power levers fully back, that's on purpose. It only pulls the levers back for about 4 seconds and then it declutches them so you can move them yourself. So always make sure, it's especially appropriate when you're flying like a flight level change descent, just make sure the thrust levers where you expect them to be. Right, with us starting the descent, let's do the descent checklist.
Descent checklist. Shoulder harness.
Well, they're secure.
Secure. Passenger signs.
They're still auto at the moment.
On or auto. Pressurization.
So we need to double check the pressurization on the Challenger. Double check that we've got the landing pressure set at the field elevation or the altimeter setting for the airport and the elevation. That's both set on there.
Set. Fuel quantity and balance.
We've got sufficient fuel. We should be landing with about 2.3, 2.4 tons, and it's nicely balanced.
Checked. FMS, landing data, charts.
So FMS, we've got the appropriate route on there. Charts we've got loaded, and performance numbers we've sent to the database.
Programmed, set. Approach briefing.
It's going to be a standard ILS approach with minimums 230 feet. We'll talk about the rest of it as we get down low.
Reviewed. VNAV transition flight level.
We've set that. Flight level 70 is appropriate for Glasgow.
Set. Descent checklist complete. In range checklist next.
Cool, you see once we've finished the checklist, I've got these memory functions set up here, so I'll push that button there and get it set back to the waypoint, or the MFD setting that I wanted. We can also pop this out momentarily. If I do MFD advance again, if I cycle along, I'll eventually get onto the aircraft, and that will let me center on the aircraft, and then I can hover over the PFD and I can zoom in with the range now. So just crossing over Belfast. There's Newtonards and Belfast lockdown here. So starting the descent, I'll give Jenny a call and make sure she can bring a van for us. I'll call her on the sat phone.
Hot start flight support. Jenny speaking. How can we help?
Please prepare a van for our passengers.
Understood. We'll have that ready for you. Anything else?
No, that's all, thanks.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Excellent. So you can see the aircraft's flying down more or less a 3-degree glide slope here. As it gets lower and lower, you'll find that the aircraft is just reluctant to decelerate. So 3 degrees is appropriate for your descent from cruise, but you need to build in a shallower margin, a shallower angle to allow the aircraft to decelerate as you get down. One of the persistent problems that people have had with the Challenger is understanding how the system transfers from FMS guidance to approach guidance. On the Airbus, it's very simple. You've got Manage Nav, which follows the FMS track. You push the LS push button and it displays the landing system diamonds. Then you push the approach mode and it kind of couples up to that. The Challenger is using a system called nav-to-nav transfer. When you get closer to the airport, it will show you the blue ghost needles that are representation of the ILS. So you can show the FMS data and the ILS data simultaneously on the HSI and on the deviation indicators on here. For that to work, it's important to double check the not just the armed navigation system, the selected navigation source, but also the preset nav. So you notice down here I've got FMS1 and preset nav VOR1. If I'd accidentally moved this knob here, I could have selected something other than VOR1 or LOC1, and if that's been set incorrectly, the nav-to-nav will not work correctly. But as well as that side, as well as the left-hand side, you've also got to make sure FMS2 is here and LOC2 is set here. And again, accidentally moving the dial here could be a problem. So make sure FMS2, VOR or LOC2, and FMS1, VOR or LOC1. That's the #1 reason why people have issues with nav-to-nav transfer. It won't show you the ILS needles until you're a lot closer to the airport. It shows the needles when you're 31 nautical miles from the airport reference point. So to see what that is, if I put the index, go to the index page, go to Fix, I'll put EGPF on here. We're currently 75 miles. So as soon as that counts down to 31 miles, we should get nav-to-nav transfer. You should have when you get the nav-to-nav system engaging, they'll have the blue ghost needles and you'll be able to put it into the approach mode. It's important not to push the approach button too early. Firstly, when you push the approach button, it locks out the preset nav. It doesn't allow you to change preset nav. But also the Challenger fully simulates false localizers and false glide slopes. So you have to basically stick to the rules on when you would engage the approach mode. Ideally within 20 miles of the ILS and within 5 degrees of the centre line. That should keep you fairly safe. But most importantly, just double check the diamonds are on the correct side. Make sure the diamonds are giving you sensible indications. You'll notice on here as well, I've got the VOR needle selected. At the moment it's still tuned to this random frequency, but by having the VOR bearing source selected, I can set it off if I use the bearing source here, and I can turn that off. But I have it set to VOR #1 so that I get the DME readout from the ILS. So as soon as the ILS is auto-tuned, I'll have the distance from the ILS shown on there, which is pretty useful to verify the FMS is doing the correct thing. So rather than messing around with cleared altitudes, I'm going to do the typical sim thing. We'll go down to 3,000 feet, or clear down 3,000 feet. So there's 3,000 set on the altitude selector, and 1013 is the altimeter setting. You notice the VNAV system is going to aim for 15 still, because that's overhead GERVA, but then it'll continue down to 3,000. Passing through flight level 200, we're about 12 minutes away from landing. I'm going to switch the seatbelt signs on and the no smoking signs on. And because we're not operating with a cabin attendant today, we'll do all this ourselves. We'll open the curtain for safety. That's just in case we end up in an evac situation on the ground. We'll also open the divider. And on the galley control panel, we'll play the landing message.
Our destination and will be landing in a few minutes. Please place all storage compartments and tables in their fully stowed position. All portable electronic devices must be turned off. Ensure that
and you can see the VNAV system gradually start to reduce the selected speed to allow the aircraft to decelerate to make 250 knots by flight level 100. On the Challenger, we've also got some SOP. The hot start community works to a set of SOPs that means that other pilots can fly together using the shared cockpit feature. And it's normal to land on the Challenger with the APU running. So we do the in-range checklist, and part of that is starting up the APU. Typically, I like to do that no less than 10 minutes before landing, but you can't start the APU above flight level 200. And you can't use the APU to run the packs, use the bleed system on the APU above flight level 150. But the automatic FO will follow both of those restrictions, so let's ask for the in-range checklist at 10 minutes to go.
In-range checklist. APU. Started. Altimeters.
Now this is an important point for the automatic FO, that it is checking stuff as well, it's not just running these things through. The reason it hasn't given the response is because I've forgotten to set the standby altimeter here. I've got 1013 on both the primaries, but the FO is like, well, you should probably set that there as well. So I'll scroll that down to make sure that's set the correct setting.
Reset, cross-checked. Avionics.
So this is my last opportunity, really, to check those modes. FMS1, VOR1, FMS2, LOC2. We've got the HSI selected, we've got PPAWS, looking good.
Set. External lights.
Below 200 we can put the pulse lights on.
Target.
And this is an important one. This is one that people forget. If you don't do this stage, there's a really high chance you lose your auto thrust. So we're going to go onto the perf thrust limit page. We put 91 in here, into the TGT, and activate it. If we don't have TGT set to 91, as we do the bleed transition, if we transition the air conditioning to the APU, there's a chance we would lose the auto thrust because it goes outside its operational limits. Don't worry about the actual value of TGT. If you have to fly a missed approach, it will go back to the takeoff rating automatically. That setting is simply there to keep the auto thrust system happy as we transfer the bleeds. It's now waiting to do the PAX transition. The APU needs to be running for 2 minutes before it starts the PAC transition. We talk about physical simulation on the Challenger. Look at the EGT at the moment. The APU is sitting here doing pretty much nothing. EGT is 266. It's not working too hard at all. The aircraft's flashing speed because it's at idle power, it's not able to decelerate, so I'll just give it a little bit of speed brake to help it slow down. You can see how slippery it is on a 3-degree path. In fact, it's doing just that little bit more than 3 at the moment, 3.8 or 4 degrees. Overhead Turnberry.
APU PAX transition.
So watch the APU EGT as it transfers the packs.
Avail completed. APU generator. On. CAS.
CAS is checked.
Checked. In range checklist complete. Before landing checklist next.
So we're leaving Turnberry and descending down towards the pilot-defined waypoint. Now obviously this pilot-defined waypoint is to make the navigation easier to understand on this tutorial and to avoid having to mess around being air traffic control as well as pilots. Coming through 10,000 feet, I'll make sure all the landing lights are on so people can see us down below and just verify that the passenger signs are on and on. So we've still got magenta needles, there's no ghost needles showing at the moment. If I look at my fix page again, you see we've just crossed 30 miles and I've got a message that says lock will be tuned. Now the reason it's showing that is you can see that my nav radios are not in automatic tuning mode at the moment. Nav 1 and Nav 2 are in manual tuning. So Nav 2 happens to be on the correct frequency, it's got the ghost needle already, the blue needles are there, but Nav 1 doesn't have that. This message is telling you it's about to do something to your navigation setup. You get a 30-second warning and then it changes over, and now it's tuned to 110.1 and we've got the ghost needles. So ghost needles on the left side, ghost needles on the right side, and it's identing as India uniform uniform. Let's just double check that's correct. India uniform uniform. Excellent. Still a little bit fast, I'll give it a little bit more speed brake just to try and maintain that 250 knots. There is a study window or a debug window for the vertical profile you can have a look at if you're desperately interested. If you go into study and FMC, FMC1 VNAV path, you can zoom in and you can see how it's computed the vertical profile. Now that we've got the blue needles, the ghost needles, we know that nav to nav is going to do its correct thing. It'll engage quite happily into the approach phase. But you can also see, as well as the magenta diamonds on the deviation indicators, we've got the blue glide slope and localizer deviation showing as well. So what I'm going to do is dial the speed back. So it's in magenta at the moment for the VNAV speed. If I just spin the knob, it'll come back all by itself into cyan, and I've got selected speed available. It's also turning out our pilot defined waypoint. This is where the 2-degree profile starts, and it will start to, that shallower profile, shallower angle will help the aircraft slow down. Remember, every time you roll wings level in the Challenger, just sync up the heading bug so that it's ahead of the aircraft. So it's just slowly adjusting onto that 2-degree descent angle now, and the speed's washing back quite nicely. The actual chart says we can go down to 2,400 feet, but I'm quite happy to intercept at 3,000 feet on this approach. That's the altitude alert saying I've got 1,000 feet to go. I'll push the centre of the altitude window to cancel the altitude knob, sorry, to cancel the alert. About 15 miles out, the ILS deviation is on the left-hand side for the localizer and above for the glide slope. That's sensible. With that in mind, I'll push approach. And note my FMS change. I've got approach LNAV and approach localizer 1 armed with glide slope armed. And also on this side, LNAV 2 and approach localizer 2. So we can be fairly confident, or very confident now, the aircraft will intercept the ILS approach. Minimum clean speed on the Challenger, for simplicity, we'll use 200 knots. So before I go below 200 knots, I need the first stage of flap. That'll let me go down to 180 knots. The next stage gets me down to 160 knots, and then it's the final approach speed. The operations reference manual included in the aircraft docs has got a whole load of speeds in there that will help you out, but these are simple speeds to work to. So before going below 200, first stage of flap, and then we can wind the speed back to 180. There's alt capture at 3000. You see with approach armed, the approach mode is armed but it hasn't engaged just yet. You'll notice the preset nav has all disappeared. It's now locked into that nav to nav. There we go. Blue needles are going to change into green needles. And then it sets the inbound course, localizer mode captures, and it turns on to the final approach track. Very straightforward. Glide slop's coming down, so let's have the next stage of flaps and come back to speed 160. And remember, wings level, synchronise the heading bug. There's glide slope capture, set missed approach alt, so missed approach on this is 3000 feet. Nice. I'm going to put the gear down and we'll start the landing checklist.
Landing checklist. Landing gear lever.
2500.
Down indicating. No steer. Arm centered clear. Anti-skid.
You see the FO does the anti-skid
Hard
check.
tested. Passenger signs. On. Wing cowl anti-ice.
That's not required today.
On or off. Continuous ignition.
The FO
On.
switches on by
Thrust
himself.
reversers. Armed. Spoilers. Stowed auto. Flaps.
And this is the second last item, so it's waiting for the final stage flap. Because the Challenger checklist is a little bit longer and you don't want to be doing it at the last minute, it's appropriate to start the before landing checklist with the flaps 30 and the gear down. It'll complete, or you can hold the checklist waiting for the final stage flap. Speaking of which, that's 5.5 miles, so let's have the final stage, and we'll bring the speed back to 128, which was the VREF, or the VREF plus 5.
Set. CAS.
That is checked.
Checked. Before landing checklist complete. After landing checklist next.
Excellent. So we've always got the charts available. It's showing the approach chart on here. I've seen some people mess around with the charts in the final stages. It's not worth worrying about. You use the chart to finish the briefing, and then you fly the approach with what you've briefed. So we are comfortably on speed. The alpha here is about 5.5, 0.55 up to 0.6. 1,000 feet above the minima. Everything's looking great. I'll just dim the HUD down a little bit. I like to be able to see through the HUD. And I'll take the autopilot out. A single click on the AP disconnect. You notice the little, if you're looking at the heads-up display, there's a small circle inside my flight path vector. That's the flight director symbology. If I'm flying with a heads-up display, I prefer to have the flight director selected off. If I'm flying with no heads-up display, I quite like having the flight directors on. But for me, with a heads-up display, the FPV is enough. So flight director's off. You'll notice the Challenger's flying the approach a little bit nose down. Just a little bit below the horizon. That's normal for the Challenger. It's just the nature of the aircraft. I've seen a few videos as well where people have forgotten about the flight spoilers. The ground spoilers on the Challenger activate automatically,
500.
but you still have to pull the flight spoilers up manually. So once we're on the ground, reversers and flight spoilers. You see the -3 degree line? If I just adjust my flight path to keep that roughly on the PAPIs, it'll all work out.
Minimums.
Looking at the far end of the runway and flying through the HUD,
100.
not staring at the symbology.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
Reversers, spoilers. So this is still Otho, our Orbex True Earth Great Britain for X-Plane 11, loaded into X-Plane 12. There's some terrain abnormalities. The runway isn't quite as bumpy as this in Glasgow, but good reason to land on runway 05 rather than 23. I just squeeze the brakes, stow the reversers, and I can stow the spoilers as well. Let's vacate to the right. And don't worry about doing anything significant until you're off the runway. The FO does the vast majority of things for you here. So once we're vacated and safe, you see the FO has already switched off the anti-collision light as we vacate the runway. Let's ask for the after landing checklist.
After landing checklist. Landing pulse recog lights. Off. Anti-collision lights. Off. Continuous ignition. Off. Windshield heat. Off. Probes. Off. Wing anti-ice. Off. Cowl anti-ice.
Not required.
On or off. Spoilers. Stowed. Flaps. 0. ATC TCAS. Alt on. Radar mode. Standby. After landing checklist complete. Engine shutdown checklist next.
Excellent. If I just pop the chart button momentarily, you'll see that after landing it automatically transfers to the ground chart, which is really useful. Some people have asked about why they can't have charts on the left hand side MFD. Well, you can, but you just need to move the ICAS using the reversionary switches. You can't ever have a situation where you cannot see the ICAS. So you've either got to move the ICAS onto the PFD or move it onto the right hand side. For single pilot work in the sim, it's much easier just to always consider it you're flying from the left hand seat. Right, we'll park in, I think it's area Juliet over here. Just before we go into the parking apron, I'll switch off the taxi lights so don't blind anybody. I'll just wait for the marshalling instructions. In fact, let's do that by looking outside and we'll self-marshal ourselves into position. Brakes released. What a beautiful aircraft. Excellent. Set the parking brake. And we'll start shutting down.
Engine shutdown checklist. Taxi lights. Off. Parking brake. Set. Reverse thrust. Stowed. Generators 1 and 2.
So because we're running a checklist that's done with the parking brake set, I'm now responsible for the actions myself. I'll set generators 1 and 2 off, but the FO continues to monitor.
Shut down.
So engine 2 shut down.
Fuel boost pumps.
So as we switch the engine off, you'll notice the boost pumps come on because the main ejector pump on number 2 is shut off. We now switch off the boost pumps.
Off. Fuel system.
And if you remember all the way back to when we started, we checked the left low pressure. Now we're checking the right low pressure as part of the fuel system check. So that's good. We'll continue.
Check. Engine 1 shut down.
Engine 1.
Check ITT below 350 degrees Celsius.
So we're looking for 350 because that's a good way to identify that the engine is actually not continuing to run. It's not unheard of to operate the fuel shut-offs and have the fuel continue to trickle through and the engine continue to run. There's additional procedures for that. In our case, they're below 350, the combustion stopped.
Anti-ice. Off. 14th stage.
14 stages up here. 1, 2, off.
Beacon.
Don't forget to switch the beacon off or the van won't approach the aircraft.
No steer. Off. ATC TCAS.
I'm just going to push the ATC button to turn the transponder to standby. I'll leave the code as 4651.
Standby 0. Parking brake if chalked.
We are not chalked just yet, but I'll give the hand signals to put the chalks in. And we'll continue the checklist.
Off. Passenger signs.
Passenger signs to let the people get out. Passenger signs off.
Cabin differential.
It's down here.
0 psi. Engine shutdown checklist complete. Securing checklist next.
Excellent. The chalks are in. And what we can do is go and open the door.
Our ride is here. Thank you, Captain. Always such a pleasure flying with you. Have a nice rest of your day.
No people just yet. But that's the approach and landing in the Hot Start Challenger 650. As I said, I'm very sorry it took so long to get there. I do have a lot of other ideas for Challenger content. It's just trying to find the time to get that content produced for you. We'll have a look at the securing of the aircraft in the next video, just so we can brush up on the oil servicing and some other bits and pieces in there. I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions about what you've seen, please leave them in the comment section below. Sometimes it takes me a bit longer to get to the comments as I'm busy at work, but I do try my very best to read all your comments, and I'm very grateful to those of you that have stuck with the channel for so long. The channel's been running for about 8 years now, in fits and starts. There's sometimes a lot of content, sometimes not so much content. I'm very grateful to those of you that continue to subscribe and watch the content I produce. Thanks very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.